Beavercreek Township Zoning Commission meeting for October the 1st, 2020 to order.
Do we have, is Jeffrey with us? Oh,
Jeff's here,
okay.
yeah.
I just want to make sure when I do roll call.
Okay. Do you want to cheat?
No, wait a second. Or you just brought it to me.
Are we
I
ready
just
for
brought it to
roll call?
order. It's roll call time, please.
Mr. Axel?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Geis?
Here.
Ms. Horton?
Here.
Mr. Hung?
Here.
Ms. Dalton?
Here. All right. Need a motion to approve the agenda that's here, and it was given to us, I believe, about 5 days in advance. So,
Catalyst.
any changes to the agenda from your end? Okay.
Well, I mean, I will be requesting a continuation of the case, and I'll explain that in a little bit, but we will still open it like we normally do.
Okay. So, motion to approve,
I make a motion to approve.
and a second.
I'll second.
Ready for vote?
Mr. Axel?
Yes.
Mr. Geis?
Yes.
Ms. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Hung?
Yeah.
Ms. Dalton?
Yes. All right. And we're not in a public notice, right? We're not doing public tonight, but we need to.
So technically, again, this was scheduled as a hearing.
Okay.
So yes,
Yes.
we would,
Okay.
yeah, we sent out a public notice for this, as case 818. So we will go through, open the case, public hearing, close that section, all of that, standard.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people here, so.
There are. So I believe then on the agenda, we're starting with a staff report to update on amendment process.
Yes, so,
Do you want me to go ahead and read the public hearing then?
yes.
Okay.
Better, yeah.
The purpose of the hearing is so the zoning
Quick.
commission may review and act on a proposed amendment to the Beavercreek Township zoning resolution being proposed by the Beavercreek Township Community Development and Risk Department. The proposed amendment would add a section to Article 18, which requires the township to first obtain approval from any easement holder before issuing permits for structures within any easement. This is case number 818.
Okay. Now the background.
So, the background for this case, the proposed language here is designed primarily to reduce the number of structures or other improvements within recorded easements. Easements like stormwater, drainage, utility easements, they represent an agreement between the landowner and the holder of the easement. In the township, the easement holder is often a governmental agency like the county soil and water, the county engineer, and other agencies, utility companies and the like. In the past several months, staff has been forwarding permits issued to various agencies that might have interest in those permits. We've been forwarding rights-of-way permits, driveway permits to Stephanie Goff, the engineer, for her, purview of the roads. We've been forwarding any permits for structures or fences within drainage easements to Ken Milton and Soil and Water, for instance. After doing this for a few months, Ken kind of reached out to us and said, hey, why are you issuing all these permits for fences and the like in drainage easements? And we said, we must. They are otherwise compliant with the code. Nothing in our code prohibits or prevents us from issuing a permit in an easement. Ken, made some good points to us about why easements exist, specifically these drainage easements, and that placement of fences or other structures in them by right degrade their ability to perform the function of the easement. So we reached out to Don Frick, our legal counsel, and said, hey, what are our options here? I mean, do we have the ability to deny a permit if we look at it and say, man, this is really going to potentially affect drainage for a whole neighborhood? And she said, no, you don't. If everything is elsewise, permitted, then you must issue a permit as your code is written. So we asked Dawn to kind of give us some ideas about language that we could add to the code that would require the easement holder's permission be given to the property owner before any improvement would be kind of constructed in that easement. So the key outcomes that we expect from this text amendment are to require any easement holder to provide written approval of any improvements within the easements they hold before staff may issue zoning permits for such improvements. We want to mitigate a potential long-term hazard to the health and well-being of the township presented by the degradation of existing stormwater runoff and drainage systems. It fulfills a direct request from a cooperative county agency, and it aligns township policy with existing development covenants and restrictions. It's something that I also want to touch on. Many of the PUD developments, the neighborhoods in the area, have covenants and restrictions written into the plat plan when it was recorded at a neighborhood that forbid the building of any structures in these easements anyways. We can't use that as a reason to deny permits that would be built in the easement, but we feel aligning our policy with existing restrictions and covenants also makes sense to us. I mean, if they were built into the recorded neighborhood, that means they served a purpose at that time. And we all, as a staff, we also know that the blockage of these drainage easements can over time really degrade the overall drainage quality in some of these neighborhoods that already are on thin ice, as it were, drainage-wise. So that is why we were requesting this. It still gives the option for the easement holder to agree to these improvements. So if Ken takes a look, say, at a drainage easement fence permit request, and says, yeah, you know what, I don't think this is gonna affect the drainage, he can still allow that permit to be issued or say, yep, you have my blessing, so to speak. But if he looks at it and says, look, putting a fence here is really gonna impact the drainage in this neighborhood, we ought to listen to Ken at Soil and Water. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. He does the calculations. He's out in the field every day. He sees the overall pattern of drainage in the township. So he's somebody that our staff should be listening to when he's telling us, you gotta stop issuing all these permits. So those are the reasons that I've submitted this before you. I would like to do like open for comments and things like that, and then before we vote, what I'd like to do is explain to you why I prefer to ask for continuation. It's based on some rule, or I guess some recommendations handed down by regional planning about how we proceed with amending our zoning resolution. Do we have any questions about my staff report or anything?
No?
I actually have a question there, Max. This is John Hung. My question is this. So I looked over the proposed changes to the language, and I'm a little bit concerned, if only because I don't see a way for the township to be able to verify that the proposed improvement either isn't in an easement of some sort, or that all the required permissions, written consents have been obtained. I guess what I mean to say is, you know, if we get a zoning permit, for example, and the homeowner says the improvement is not going to be in any easement, well, how do we know that for certain? You know what I mean? We don't have, I mean, I don't know if I see anything in there about getting some sort of survey done, and there's some sort of title report done to examine whether or not there are any easements and whether or not the property is subject to any easement. So I'm curious as to know how our zoning department is really going to know that there is no such easement, or that all the written easement consents are there. Can you explain that a little bit to me?
Sure. So right now, when we receive a permit application, one of the first things that we do is find it in the Greene County GIS website, look at the property. For most properties in the township, all of them in PUDs and any other planned neighborhoods, they were recorded through a process at regional planning and through the county. And that recording process also records all the easements that were granted when that neighborhood was kind of conceived. So we are actually able to go and look at neighborhoods and see a whole map of all the parcels in it and see where all the easements are. So we have a pretty good idea of where most easements exist. There are definitely some properties that may have easements that we are unaware That being said, we are aware of many more properties right now that have fences and sheds and other things within drainage easements. Again, because of this process that we implemented a few months ago, forwarding these permit applications, well, actually, the permits that we have issued to these governing agencies. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of how we would determine whether or not a permit request fell within an easement area.
And about the permission.
Sure. Oh, and you asked kind of too, how would we get the required permission from the easement holder? Our plan is, and I believe it's written in the language as well, that a written permission or written acceptance from the easement holder would be required to be submitted at the time of the application. It's our office's idea right now that should you approve this and should it go through, what we would do is kind of create a templated sheet that we would send out to various common easement holders like soil and water, like utility companies. And then when a resident said, hey, we'd like to do this, and we say, well, actually, it runs afoul of this section of the code, we can provide them with that sheet. We can provide them with the person who holds the easement and make it easy to facilitate that kind of request from their end. It's then kind of up to the easement holder to decide whether or not it makes sense for them to put, this structure and improvement within the easement. So that's kind of how we know when an easement's there, and then how we would ensure that we have the correct permissions from the easement holder.
And then how we ensure that they put it where they're showing they're going to put it on the plot plan.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, so part of each permit application is we receive a plot plan with the proposed improvements. That plot plan is typically taken directly from the GIS website. Often, if it's the actual surveyor's plot plan that was turned in when the house was built, that will have any easements listed on it as well. Even if it's not that, even if it's the top-down view from the GIS, that also gives us a really good idea. They draw on it exactly where it's going to go. And if it's going to be in the easement, we have a good idea from, again, clicking on GIS, taking a look at that underlayer map of easements and stuff.
And if they've been told it would encroach in an easement and that they have to move it out of an easement, if that's required, the permit would be issued, and then I go out and do an inspection to make sure it's not going to encroach in the easement. And then I sign off on the inspection. Should they move it after I have approved the location, then we have recourse at that point to revoke the permit or to make them correct it rather.
So I have a question. Were you finished, were you satisfied with the answers? That your questions have been answered? Not, were you satisfied with the answers? Were you satisfied that your questions have been answered?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
That makes sense to me now that I think about it. I kind of forgot about Greene County's GIS system
Yeah.
and how robust it is.
Yeah.
So when that was mentioned, I said, oh, you know what, that would be a pretty easy way to do it. So I understand, thanks.
So,
Just real quick, this all came about because I was issuing permits, and then I would go in and do the check in GIS. And they would want to put a fence all the way on the property line, which they're allowed to do. You're allowed to put a fence on your property line. Unfortunately, the back 10 or 15 feet of your property may be a drainage easement. So and I've got a little thing sitting on my desk that I hand wrote, so I put the same thing on everybody's permit when necessary, about that being, this serves as notification that the proposed structure, fence, accessory structure, whatever, will encroach in a recorded drainage easement, sewer easement, whatever it is, and that this note on here serves as notice to the homeowner that should repairs or maintenance need to be done within that easement, or if the drainage is blocked in any way, that portion of the fence or that structure can be moved at the owner's expense. I have written that. How many have I written that on? There must be 8 to 10 permits that I've issued, fences mostly, that I've had to write that on. And then Ken and I had a discussion phone discussion one day, and he goes, I think you can deny issuing permits when they wanna encroach in an easement. And I said, no, we don't, it's not our easement, we can't enforce that. So that's what prompted us trying to find a way, so this will put it on the owner of the easement to grant permission. Should they not grant permission, I will contact the applicant for the fence, the accessory structure, whatever it is, and say, hey, we don't have permission for this, you haven't provided this, so you are going to have to revise your plot plan to show that you have taken the fence, the accessory structure, whatever it is, out of the easement before I can issue this permit. And they would have to submit at that point a revised plot plan that shows that. And then, of course, once it's been issued, they have to notify me when they're ready for their inspection. If they do a fence, typically whoever does the fence comes out and stakes it, either with the wooden stakes and the line, or they start marking where the post holes are gonna go. And then at that point, I come out and I do the inspection and make sure it matches what they have submitted and what I have approved on that plot plan as part of their permit. I stamp that, put the permit number on there, and that means that plot plan that you submitted is what I am approving. If you deviate from that, well then you have to submit a revised drawing.
Yeah. So.
Does that make you feel better?
Oh, yeah, no, I kind of know the ropes anyway, but my question is there in this text amendment, is there some place where we define what improvement is? Or is there a definition for that?
I would have to take a look at our definition section of the code to find out if improvement is indeed defined.
That's the only thing that I was
I'm gonna
curious
say
about.
it
I don't think it
I
is.
don't believe so.
Accessory structure might be the better way to do that.
Sure.
But then becomes, not is it only on the easement? Because a lot of people don't come to get the approvals, right, the permits to do some things. They know that there's a utility thing there, and they're just taking their chances, and it's not going to be that 30th year that they own that somebody comes in and wipes it out, right? But my question is, when does that accessory translate to you would need to have a variance? Because there's some people that will put, like, you know, a small shed or outbuilding on something like that. Do you know what I'm saying? Versus when do they go and they have to get an approval for something that's much larger to put out?
Sure. Well, so we consider literally anything in the easement to be an impediment to the purpose of the easement. So in a lot of the covenants and restrictions, it says nothing shall be erected which in any way impedes the flow of water along the drainage easement. Now, some could argue that certain fence constructions and other, there are ways to build a fence within a drainage easement that would almost not restrict, but there's no way you can place solid matter in front of water and have it not at least divert the flow of that water somewhat, right? So we don't want to determine, this size, it can extend into the easement 2 feet or 3 feet or whatever, and that should be totally fine. We think that the easement should kind of be the sacrosanct zone, and only when the easement holder determines, you know what, it can go in there and it won't affect the purpose of this easement, only then should we allow it. That is our view at this time. Again, just speaking with Ken, and I mean, taking a look at overall drainage issues within the township, I don't know, how much you might see what goes on in some of these newly platted neighborhoods, but nearly every plot, every residence has 15 feet of drainage easement going along their backyard. So there's this 30-foot drainage easement that separates two pieces of property. And sometimes they need all 30 feet of that because it's soaked through with water. Should a fence be in there? Is that pushing that water onto one neighbor's property versus another? I mean, those are the kind of questions that it's not just about, this is an important function of it, that yes, we are essentially saying, we want you, or we want us to be able to say, you can't use that last 15 feet of your property maybe exactly how you'd like to. And I realize that's a big ask. But one could argue that those drainage easements shouldn't be part of anybody's property. They should be part of the HOA's property as a drainage easement exclusively. You know what I mean? Like they're in there for a reason to facilitate drainage, and it's really important out here near the Beaver Creek where a lot of this area is prone to flood. So that's kind of why I don't want to get into us deciding, well, if it's only 5 feet in, we're not going to send it out. You know, it's up to the easement holder to determine whether the proposed action is okay or not. The proposed easement holder, right, is going to be more of an expert in that particular field than any of our zoning staff will be. And that's kind of part of why we want to put the onus on them to say yes or no on this.
And we'll get the appropriate documentation, we'll get something in writing. It may be an email, it may be an official letter, I don't know, but we'll have something to attach to that permit for the record to show whether it was approved or it was denied to build the easement. And then the permit will be issued pending them removing whatever the structure is from the easement. And then I'll make my inspection, and then they will be expected to follow through and not change and then put it back in the easement after I've already inspected.
Okay. I don't have any more questions. Do you have questions?
I do not.
Questions?
I
Thoughts, opinions?
I do have some thoughts.
Got some thoughts? Want to share?
I take issue with this.
It's cold outside.
Right, the change has gotten me. My understanding of an easement is giving someone access to your property. The problem I have with this is we're giving the easement holder the decision on someone else's property. And I don't agree with that. Like Max said, in these developments, you know, foresight, the developer should have had enough foresight to not include that in someone's individual lot. I know why they do it, because they don't want to take care of it. I just think, and as Lori said, if the easement holder says, no, you can't put a fence there, is there any recourse that the property owner has as far as coming before us or somebody, or is it just no, you can't do it. You've got to move your fence in 15 foot because you have an easement, a drainage easement. I think it would depend on what the easement says, but you're giving the decision of someone's enjoyment of their own property to somebody else, an easement, and I don't like that. That's my thought.
That's definitely a reasonable opinion, and I take with all seriousness the fact that what we're asking you is basically to say, yes, people cannot use, you know, maybe the back 15 feet of their property. I know that's not something that you can take lightly. Something that I will posit or put out there is that you mentioned that the reason the developers do this is because they don't want to take care of it, and that's part of it. But part of it, I think, is also, in my experience, I know it's limited, but that developers want to squeeze every dollar out of the land that they buy, and they can't sell somebody just
Right.
a 20-foot strip of land. You know what I mean?
Then I believe that these should have been no fence, and the easement area should be written in the covenants of the HOA.
And so what we're running into is that they are written into those HOA covenants, and then people are willfully ignoring the HOA covenants and restrictions, and we do not have the ability to say, because the HOA says you can't do it, we can't issue the permit. We don't have that ability.
We don't have the authority.
We must issue, in fact, we have issued multiple fence permits within easements where it says strictly in the covenants that it's not allowed.
But you can't build it, but you guys have to.
Correct.
And then it's up to the HOA to enforce their.
To enforce the
yeah,
rules.
Yeah.
Which, while I think is a reasonable division of responsibility. If they don't,
If they don't.
what ends up happening is a bad outcome for not just necessarily even that neighborhood, but potentially down the line, other adjacent
Right.
neighborhoods,
Yeah, they're down.
the water table. I mean, there's a lot of.
Well, I just think that then that should fall on the HOA. I mean, then they need to get their act together and, you know, it shouldn't fall on an easement holder or us as a township. You know, that's what the HOA are there for. You know, I just have an issue with an easement holder deciding how I can use my property. I mean, I have an easement on my
Also,
property.
when that property is purchased, the plot plan is part of the paperwork, so you.
I understand.
The easement is shown on there, so you are aware.
And it really depends on what the easement actually says. You know,
Yeah.
every easement's gonna be different, you know, if they're violating what they signed for, but if their easement, when they bought the property, says nothing about putting a fence in the easement, then I have a problem with the easement holder then coming back and saying, no, you can't put a fence there. That should have been taken care of when they wrote the easement, is my, you know, if they're violating the easement, that's fine. But to make the decision whether they're violating it or not to the easement holder, I have an issue with it.
Well, and would this be like retroactive to,
Unfortunately, I don't believe there's a way, and maybe someone could, but I
so
don't
I mean,
think we
so
can
somebody
make
could
it.
technically have a fence right now up in the easement, and we could technically, their
No,
neighbors say,
I-
no, the other ones
We can't
couldn't?
make them, once it's up,
Yeah,
we can't. I mean, if something happens in that easement, and it's one of the permits I've issued before this went into effect, it would have to be up to the easement holder. If they need to get in there, then they'll take the fence so that they can get in, but we can't go back and.
But is there any, does the landowner have any action after, if an easement holder says no right now, or according to this, would they have any ability to appeal it, go before somebody, let someone,
That would,
They
that'd
get
be a
killed.
question for Dawn.
Well, and I mean, even if whatever the code doesn't grant it now, it's something that, as you mentioned it, should be addressed in this same language. What is the specific appeals process for this denial for a permit? I agree with you there. And I think when I go to explain kind of the reason I'm asking for continuance and the procedure changes that I'm looking at, that these kind of things, you know, hey, what about this, might get addressed a little bit
Yeah.
before our first meeting.
as long as that, you know, I don't like it, but if there is some kind of appeals process, just because an easement holder says, no, you can't put a fence there to the property owner, then I think the property owner has every right to at least have his case heard before somebody. I mean, then you
Well, if a permit is denied, then an appeal can do BZA.
Okay. So right now,
But the reality is, if the easement holder says, doesn't grant the permission, I mean, the easement, when you have your property, you're aware of whether you buy it that way or not, it's the buyer aware, if there's an easement for the property, they have a property interest in that easement.
So a person, is what she's saying, is when they buy their lot, they're told that at the time.
yeah, I understand that.
Well, a lot of times they're not told, they don't find it out until they're at closing sometimes.
Well, see, and so there's no way to make builders accountable then for that? I mean,
well, so I can tell you that after working on this issue for a couple of months, the town, we've had discussion as a staff a couple of times now, and this has led us to kind of this idea that we need to be that voice. Now, we can't shut it down. If it goes to regional planning through the subdivision process or through the recording process, and we say, look, we've got a real issue with these easements being part of individual people's property. They should be their own separate piece of land. They should be managed and maintained by either the HOA or the developer until they hand over.
mhm.
But that's just our voice. And if it doesn't go through that way, if it's still recorded the way it has been, we want to be able to have our own recourse to say, okay, we believe this is done wrong and we need it to be corrected. So I do agree with you that, so Dawn kind of suggested that maybe right now, if a permit was denied, that it would go through the Board of Zoning Appeals process.
Right.
If this language kind of referenced that, again, just so people knew as they were reading the code, look, if you get denied for this reason, here is the, refer to this section of the code and here's how you can appeal that. Do you think that would kind of strike the balance between what we need to do to try to protect the long-term sustainable growth of this township and the interest of property owners?
I think what makes this different is that it's not utilities, it's not, this is soil and water. And there's no, it's more, this can sound really stupid, it is fluid. You know what I'm saying? It can move.
Yeah.
And we all are aware of that when we talk about flood zones. But now this, we're not as aware of it, right? And so people take risks all the time when they, put a temporary shed or a swing set or hot tub or deck or something over in the, why they would, under DP&L, on DP&L easements or whatnot. But it happens. And nobody cares unless somebody gets on an oops line. They didn't call oops and they cut some sort of fiber optic or something. But this is different. This is because if you put something on your property and I'm next door to you and you cause my basement to flood, that's different.
Right.
There's not enough elbow room, right? So that's the harder part of this, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of these
I agree.
easements that we're dealing with, these drainage easements, they were put there because that's where the natural flow
Flow
of
the
water
water
is.
went, right.
Yes, that was the natural flow of water was,
And then have you seen the wording of any of the drainage easements? Are they all pretty much the same? I mean, does it say no structures, no fences in the easement?
It does on the record, on the recorded plan. Green County has that on the recorded plan. Oh, you can look
So,
it up.
yeah, if you'd like, what I wanted to do was just kind of go into one of the neighborhoods that we've been.
No, that's good, because that's what I was wondering. I was like, I wanted to see what you're dealing with. Because I was wondering because I haven't lived here long enough, that whole flooding that takes place on Factory, is that just because, or is that due to how we've developed, that it floods the road out like that on Factory?
It's arguable. It's arguable either way. I mean, that's.
Well, the proximity to the river
It's part of it.
is part of that, and there has been some issues with the river being clogged with debris, various types of debris. Yeah.
So it's looking like it's running a little slow.
And they are working on that.
Yeah, well, that's,
Let's see.
So the question would be, did we cause some of our own
well, that's what I'm
problems by
wondering.
allowing
And then can we
the?
actually be proactive and prohibit that from happening as we grow and develop?
River Reserve,
Well,
you could do like Riverview or
we,
Riverview or Riverstone.
I don't know, I would just never buy a house that was gonna be in some type of floodplain.
well, but it's the flashing now. It's not just the fact that you have one area that might be close to the river. It's that you've got the flashing that's happening because all of the soils, within a half a mile have been moved in some way and recompacted. So the flow is already off.
It's right across from us, where we are.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
especially if we keep developing like that on
That's
the
actually
creek
probably
like that.
the
Well, that's not what, I
Yeah.
didn't want to say it
So
out
I visioned
loud.
quite a few over there.
Say it.
Well, we gotta slow some of that, we gotta slow it down again. I mean,
Should
but
be,
we're not allowed to
should
say
be on
that.
Indian River.
We're not allowed to say it.
Other side of Constitucion.
Well,
I just
Chuck
don't
said
like
it and he's not hearing.
Well, did you see the retaining
go.
pond that they're building over at that new one? Yeah, this is the one at Indian River, the MI Homes retaining pond is humongous.
Yeah.
One of those on
Yeah.
the backside on Ridge
So
Road.
the flow has to go into
Yeah.
that retaining pond somehow,
Somehow.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that.
once I click on one, you'll come over here and down here, it'll give us the plat cabinet. So this is a scan of what's on file in the recorder's office.
I just wanna point out.
Well, I noticed how that
the
one
one
person's
next to the
fence, yeah, I
outlined
see how that
one,
one is, cause
I
they put
issued
it
that permit and they're out of the easement.
in and out of the easement.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They are out of the easement.
Which, and I mean, personally, I don't see a problem with that, and having a
And I
gate if you
didn't
wanna
ask
access the
them.
property, they
Yeah,
just
I
did.
didn't ask them on
Yeah.
that either.
So back when our forefathers were making our small cities, every town had Water Street, and we knew why it was called Water Street,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So now we have to come up with Waterway.
Yeah, waterway.
Waterway.
There you go.
Ridge Brook, I mean, right
You
there.
see down at the bottom, there's some,
Right.
Don't go off that ridge.
Don't go off the
In
ridge,
the back
go
of
into
each
the
of these
brook.
properties, it goes, now it extends past the property lines here, the lot
Mhm.
lines,
Mhm.
but you've got a 40-foot storm sewer and drainage easement, and it's in the 100-year floodway,
Yeah.
and it says, and no build easement. Now,
Right.
if you come further
So are these the
down,
plans from the builder, or are these,
these are what's on file with the county report. These are the plans to the
Okay.
neighborhood.
I think if you go up a little further, it should have a statement in there
Yeah,
about
that's what I
no
was trying
building
to find.
in
So
an easement.
typically on
Mhm.
this sheet,
It's
Mhm.
usually on them.
Yeah.
Homeowner's response, stormwater drainage, any area designated for the natural flow of surface water shall be at all times kept free and clear from any obstruction to such natural flow of surface water. In no case shall any improvement, alteration, or construction upon such designated area be made without the approval of the Greene County engineer or his designee.
so really in all this, we're really looking at stuff moving forward for new development. I mean, this is not
Correct.
impacting, say, easements
Right.
that are already in
Or
place.
from permits that we issue from that point forward,
Okay.
that the language is approved.
I mean, almost all the neighborhoods platted out have that exact same language in there about no improvement of any kind which may impact the flow of drainage, and we don't have the tools to follow along with that, but it's there for a reason.
Yeah. And we have no authority, it's not ours, it's the county who has, through the subdivision process, set out, to accommodate the drainage,
Mhm.
as part of the infrastructure. We have no control over that, we can't.
Well, which
I
one
can't
supersedes?
deny.
So the HOA written, stated, they can still come and get a permit and put up a fence even though, I mean, that to me doesn't, then what's the point of covenants?
Well, that's all, everybody knows that covenants are just
That-
temporary.
So, yeah, so I mean,
I mean, they have
The
no,
covenants
I
till
mean,
you
we
get
get
caught.
folks that call and say, I said, now how tall of a fence are you looking to do? And, oh, well, the covenants only allow me to have 4 in the
Mhm.
backyard. And I said, okay, as far as I can tell you, the township will let you do 6 feet.
yes, 6 feet, mm-hmm.
They're like, no, I don't wanna, and most of the people will
They're
follow
fine
the
with it,
covenants,
yeah.
say, you always have those who are like, I'm gonna put up a 6-foot fence, what are they gonna do?
Yeah, what do you do?
right,
Mhm.
exactly.
And I have to issue it, I can't deny them
Yeah, 'cause
a
it
permit
says.
for a 6-foot fence, cause that's what we allow in the backyard.
Mhm.
So at what point in time can they say, okay, well, I'm through with you, I'm going to the county engineer because the county engineer has the final say?
Well, I'm thinking, if this language gets approved, the way I envision it working as the person who predominantly issues the permits, Max and I both do, but I think I will predominantly be doing the most. If they apply for a fence permit, they wanna put it on the property line, and there's a 10, 15-foot, sometimes there's only a 5-foot easement at the back.
Mhm.
It depends on what the subdivision is. I would have to get hold of them and say, hey, we can't, you have to get permission from Greene County engineer, I guess, is where we would have to go rather than Ken.
And it depends on the kind of easement too.
Yeah.
The covenants are kind of our basis for, okay, one of the reasons why we know we need to have an extra step here and not just be issuing these without some sort of oversight.
All right,
But for instance, the Greene County engineer isn't gonna wanna look at drainage easement questions. She might look at, actually, I don't even know what the Greene County engineer would wanna look at. It would be.
they wanna make sure the road's not gonna flood.
Exactly,
Yeah. Ridge
she'd
brook.
be looking at the 30,000-foot level, how the whole thing is plotted out, how it's gonna fit into the existing road infrastructure, all that. But soil and water, they look and say, man, if this easement gets blocked, then here's what's likely to happen to the flow of water, and that's gonna impact this further down the line, which is gonna impact this.
We have leach beds here, we have
I mean, we'll
sewer
probably
here,
we'll
we
get
have
hold of
farm
everybody
here,
that
right?
may Be involved and see how they, I guess, see how they wanna work it from their
And
end of things.
part of our plan here is, should this language be enacted, to create a table of reference for folks to say, okay, if it's a drainage easement, here's who you need to get
Yeah.
approval from. If it's a utilities easement, here's who you would wanna get approval from, those kind of things.
How are you with
And
that?
we'll direct them that way, and then I'll let them know that they need to contact whoever it is and get their permission to put this structure in the easement. And that I need something in writing stating that they have permission. And if they call back and say, well, they wouldn't give me permission, my next step would be, well, can you move it in out of the easement? Can you do that without it being too much of a burden on you? If they say, no, I wanna put it back up, you told me I could have it 10 feet off the property line, on the side and the rear property line. Well, yeah, you could, except there's an easement there, and I can't give you until I have permission from the easement holder. So then at that point, I guess, we would tell them that they also have the option to go to the BZA.
Then, yeah, so I'm thinking about the people that's next door that, didn't have this rule,
Yes.
that have
That's what I was saying.
the
and then
fence
you
a
have
little
one person
further.
that does
They
it,
go to
one person that
BZA because they say it looks
We're
better.
probably gonna get some initial pushback. Well, you let my neighbor do it.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
that was, we have revised the language because there were concerns about the drainage.
Well, I think the bottom line is that a homeowner probably should have the right to make the decision, but they have to make the decision understanding that it's going to cost them the money if there's damage
And that's what it
because
comes
of
down
it.
to. If the holder
Right.
of the easement needs to get in to do like
Yeah, I-
regular maintenance or to make repairs, maybe there's a pipe that's buried, I don't know, 10, 15 feet underground that they have to access to repair or replace.
Well, I think that's fair, especially when
You
you're.
know, and
paying
that
it
fence is in the way.
Mhm.
Well, they're gonna remove that portion of the fence that's in their way at the homeowner's expense. They don't have to put it back up.
And they're not going to, most
Yeah,
of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It
then
says it right there in
be
their
careful letting the
contract.
dogs out the next day, cause the back of your fence is gone, but,
Right.
yeah.
And they don't have to tell you they're moving
No.
it, it's their
One would
easement.
hope they would let, they would let the homeowner know they're gonna be digging back there, but that's, again, that's not us, that's.
They don't have to.
Yeah.
All right,
So, all that being said, if there are any more questions, please let me know. If not, I think, the next step would be open it up for public, and then, like I said, before we vote, please let me kind of give you a reason why I'd asked it to do it.
And then we'll keep the public
we're gonna keep the
hearing-
public
keep the public
open,
hearing
so we don't
portion
have to
open.
do that again,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, my question then is, do you have to make a new, notification to the public with the new text amendment? Or this is just because it's ongoing, you don't have to
No, we won't, you mean re-advertise, republish?
re-advertise with the
As
new
long
language?
as you were thinking this, it should be through the appropriate channels it needs to go through prior to your next regularly scheduled meeting in November, which would be November 5th. So you can just continue
Okay,
the hearing until.
That's what I was
leaving the public
thinking.
portion, public input portion open
so,
until November 5th.
what she said.
Yes, we agree.
For the record, what
For
you
the
said.
For the record, what she said over there.
Okay, all right. So at this point, if there's no more discussion, we can move on. The agenda item, I believe, is to look at our minutes, yes?
Well, do we need an official?
We would need to officially open the public hearing section, the public comment section, as it were. And then continue, we have to have a motion from you to continue the hearing to a time and date to be named and.
Oh, I thought we did that.
Well, we need you to motion
Officially.
and.
Yeah,
To
we need an
officially
official
do it.
motion
You
and
to
a
officially do
second.
it.
Okay.
Official and.
So at this point, I need a motion to keep the public portion of the hearing open for further discussion, and vote come November the 5th, correct? Did I say that right? That's the motion I need.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Appleton?
Yes.
Mr. Geist?
Yes.
Ms. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Hom?
Yes.
Ms. Stalter?
Yes.
All right.
So, with it being continued, if you'll allow me to kind of give you a brief explanation of what we learned from regional planning, and why I'm asking to kind of move this a little bit down the road. For a couple of actions before you, the process has been to submit to regional planning for a courtesy review of the language. That was the phrase they used when I first reached out to them in, I guess, late March or so, to kind of familiarize myself with the requirements of this process and how to move on a zoning amendment. In speaking with Rhonda Painter, a 20-year zoning veteran at the regional planning, she kind of outlined the steps, which were courtesy review from regional planning, zoning commission, then the actual executive and full committee review from regional planning, then board of trustees for final approval. At the last full commission hearing for some of the AX1, it was the AX1, the HBO, and the rezoning of that Cummings parcel that were before you last meeting, one of the commission members said, hey, hold on a minute, why wasn't this done this way? Which is, he said, no, actually what should be done is, it should be taken to regional planning after a motion from the zoning commission. So we would essentially, now there's a couple other ways. It could be the board of trustees passes a resolution, the zoning commission makes a motion, or an application is filed with our office from a lessee or owner of property which is to be affected. Now, I've submitted to you each time an application from Beavercreek Township, which is an owner or lessee of property to be affected, and any of the ones that weren't initiated by a resident. That, in my understanding, satisfied that first requirement, which allowed it to go then to regional planning. We have been told now by, after they kind of further reviewed the process, they said, you know what, I think he's right. I think what has to happen is you have to get your motion or whatever, and regional planning has to have its executive and full committee review before zoning commission has its public hearing on it. So that way zoning commission has access to regional planning's official recommendation before making their recommendation to the trustees. Again, just want to point out that the process was as it was before on the recommendation of regional planning. Even 20-year professionals, even people who have been doing this for a long time, maybe quite don't understand exactly what makes it right or the exact right way to do it. I think our office did, in good faith, the best we could to determine the correct practice. And I still think the last several zoning commission actions before you have been more in line with the letter and spirit of ORC than previous zoning actions, which in my understanding have not in any way, shape, or form involved regional planning commission. That being said, what I'm asking for again with the continuance is I'd like to bring this to zoning or regional planning for their official review, so that on November, when we come back and continue this, you can have their official recommendation.
I think we had questions about that. We had some discussion about previously what we would do is hear the case. If sometimes regional would come here and talk to us as opposed to giving us a formal stance on it. But our decision always went to the commissioners. It never had that sidestep before we went forward that I recall. So I remember having that discussion. But I think collaboration is the important part that we don't want to miss. So that if we get the process right, and what we're supposed to be doing is, you know, making the decision, giving the commission, and then having a final decision made by the trustees. That interim piece didn't make sense to me.
I admit, as I was being told it, I had this, I believe we discussed it, like why would it come here first, and why would only a motion from you or a resolution from you trigger action from regional planning? Shouldn't they have input before that? Again,
So maybe another thing, so you talk about regional planning giving a look at this, shouldn't we also be having soil and water look at this?
so yeah, so Ken Middleton is made aware of our,
So Ken is the representative for soil and water?
yes,
Okay,
sorry,
okay.
Ken Middleton is the
For the county
director
soil.
of
Okay.
soil and water.
Okay,
He kind of asked us to do something of it. Now, when we kind of put this language together and say, okay, here's what we're thinking, we want to put something in our code, because that should work. But he's also not a zoning professional. He doesn't necessarily know the best or, you know, whatever, most efficient way to put this in the code either. So we know that he supports the general effort of doing what we can to disallow structures and improvements in recorded drainage easements. But that's about what he knows, and he supports that.
Okay.
We'd be happy if the commission thought it was valuable to either ask him to appear here on November 5th and kind of make a statement, or to provide a written statement that kind of says, hey, look, I'm all on board, and here's the value I see or don't see in this process.
so we'll
I'd like
have
to hear
that.
from him.
Yeah.
Hmm?
I'd like to honestly hear from him personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be great.
I think it'd be good if he came.
I think we could probably get him to come.
Yeah.
Probably done.
We could give him treats if you want, like free Rice Krispie treats or something.
I don't know,
No?
maybe a mask.
Maybe.
I don't know, that might be considered a bribe.
Oh, that might
Oh.
be, okay.
I don't
Okay, then never
know.
mind, we
have to
won't
be
give any
careful with
treats.
that.
No treats.
So I will make sure that I will do my best to have him here in person, but if for whatever reason he cannot, I will make sure at least he provides a written statement kind of expressing his thoughts on this proposed action.
It's easy when you're volunteers to look a little,
Fabulous.
hmm?
Fabulous.
Yeah, well, we just wanna make sure we're doing it right.
Absolutely,
know.
and, you know, not gonna lie and say that there isn't some small bit of egg on my face for not having this right the first time, but I'd like to think that,
I
you
don't,
know, we need to just continually improve, and now I believe we've got the correct setup, and we'll continue.
the dialogue takes place, the effort is there, you know, we're not perfect, none of us are, especially volunteers. Right, so, all right.
So, with that, I guess I would ask for you to make a motion for us to send regional planning, or for us, the staff, to essentially submit a zoning resolution amendment to this effect that would mitigate the placement of structures, and if we don't have that motion from you, then this process will not move any further forward. It won't go to regional planning, it won't, so that's the motion I'm asking for tonight.
So you're asking for a motion to submit the proposed text amendment to regional planning for review.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll make that
For,
motion.
for an official, it's not just for a review, for an official stance, right?
Correct.
Right.
Regional planning will provide an official, recommendation, is their.
For an
term
official
it.
recommendation. And just to clarify, that includes Ken. Ken is
Yeah.
the representative
Moving forward
of
to have
soil
this.
and water for
No,
regional
yeah,
planning.
No.
Planning authority.
No,
Regional
no,
Planning
he's not
commission.
part of regional planning.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Ken
we
is
also
the-
want it for Ken. We
Well,
need,
Well-
yeah, but that's different, right, than what?
Can
I,
we-
I'll note that in the minutes that you have requested that we see if he can be
Become
present at the
Okay.
November 5th meeting.
But he doesn't have to make an official recommendation because of,
No, he'll just come and address you and let
Okay.
you know from his perspective.
Because the recommendation is
Yeah,
for
what they-
language for the zoning
okay,
ordinance.
Cause he's
Okay.
already recommended that, yes, he wants us to.
Well,
start
Ken will tell us the
issuing
why, this is gonna tell us
just
the
the
how.
how,
Yeah,
okay,
Yeah, there you go.
all right. I think he made the motion.
Yeah, second.
Oh, who made the? Bob?
I did.
Bob.
Bob did, okay.
Second,
Okay, so, we ready for the vote?
sure.
Mr. Acetone?
Yes.
Mr. Geist?
Yes.
Ms. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Hung?
Yes.
Ms. Stalter?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you all again for hearing me out and for kind of understanding, this little hiccup and how we're gonna move forward. I appreciate it.
Good. Now on the agenda are the minutes.
There you go.
The minutes from the October 6th.
August.
Work
August 6th.
session, we don't have to have the work session minutes approved, do we?
No, a work session, and I can just email those to you if you want. Since no action is taken at work sessions, you guys don't need to
Okay.
approve the minutes. I do have them for the record. I'll be happy to
But,
shoot you a copy of those so you can see what.
well, we had a commission meeting on the
Yeah, you have a
6th,
meeting first.
and then we had the
And
work
then you did the
session.
work
So we
session,
only
correct.
need to look at the minutes from October the 6th.
No, August 6th.
August 6th, I mean, August
She's
6th.
jumping
It's in the
into the
future.
head in the future.
I know,
She is.
She wants to go vote.
I do. I want the pandemic to be, oh, wait,
Now
I'm
he's
being
gonna-
funny. It was a funny.
So are we waiting on a motion?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if everybody wants to look at them, but otherwise it's a motion to
I
approve is
apologize.
what we're
I didn't get
after.
it out to you sooner.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
We have a
As
motion on the
presented.
table.
I will second that motion. My name is spelled correct, so I agree.
I was gonna say, everybody's name's spelled right.
That's right, thank you,
I
thank
looked at it
you.
and I thought, I gotta double check.
I gotta
and
make it this
check
right.
All
I
right,
appreciate
so
that.
we'll read
Right.
the members that were present then. Mr. Geist,
Yes.
Ms. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Hunt,
Yep.
Ms. Stalter.
Yes.
I believe
Awesome.
Mr. Brown also, if I'm not mistaken, was a voting member.
I think he was, like
Oh,
an
was he?
alternate, yeah. Or was he? Yeah.
Jeffrey,
Because Andrew's gone
you were
with
at
us.
that meeting, correct?
His name's not on here.
I was.
Oh, others in
That would
attendance.
be the August 6th.
Oh, no.
No,
that
he
our
wasn't
last
on here.
September meeting,
That was a
right.
September
okay.
one. That was
Yeah.
last month.
We're good. No, we're good.
Ann wasn't even here September, no show, Ann.
So I got it.
That was when
So
Ann
the
decided
minutes
not
were
to
approved.
come
Thank you.
Play
It was
with
probably the
us.
most efficient meeting you've had,
It
isn't
was.
it?
Super
Whoa.
We got so much done that night. Crazy.
Okay, now I'm ready to adjourn. A motion to adjourn, please.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
And a second. You can keep
Mr.
this for your
Axel?
record.
Yes.
Mr. Geist,
Yes.
Ms. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Hunt,
Yep.
Ms. Dalton.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you all.